Hi, this is Rob. Welcome back to the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast. This one is all about persistence and when your strategy makes sense, nurturing a fierce determination to keep going, even when the results aren't going your way. It's with a smart, down-to-earth fundraiser named Sarah Tavener from the Minds Advisory Group, or MAG. She talks about a truly fabulous fundraising success and how the journey to achieving it was very long, sometimes demoralising, but ultimately immensely valuable. Just listening to Sarah's story left me more likely to keep going through the tough times. I hope it has the same effect on you.
So we were awarded the 2025 Conrad and Hilton Humanitarian Prize, $3 million in unrestricted funding, which is obviously an enormous win. And, this is my lovely big win, but, there's been just as many crushing heartbreaks within that. We have been applying for the Hilton Prize for 19 years. So this was our 19th year. And I'm sure many of your listeners have been in that position where everything just felt so right, and yet it didn't go your way. You've got to kind of think outside the box a little bit and think, did I put our most inspirational stories forward? Did I talk about the most important priorities for the organisation? And fundamentally, am I answering the question that they've asked?
Hi Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hi Rob, lovely to see you. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. I'm so keen to share this story with our listeners, but before we get into it, what's your role and where do you work?
So my role is the head of global philanthropy, and I work at MAG, or the Mines Advisory Group. So we are an organisation removing and destroying landmines and other unexploded ordnance from conflict-affected communities around the world.
Okay, and it's such an important cause. I've really enjoyed getting to know you quite a bit over the years. Some of our listeners might remember our Thankathon episode, which ultimately was kick-started by a talk you shared at our Breakfast Club for Fundraising Leaders in January 2020 that then inspired some other people to go on and do wonderful Thankathons. So thank you anyway for being the catalyst for that. You've been a member of the Bright Spot membership for many years. I've enjoyed doing training sessions with your team as well. But for today, there's a particular interesting win you've had recently that you let me know about that I think does make for some really interesting learning points. So top line, could you share with our listeners what your good news was?
Yeah, certainly. So in the summer of last year, we were contacted by the Conrad and Hilton Humanitarian Prize, which some of your listeners may be familiar with, may have applied for themselves, and we won. So we were awarded the 2025 Hilton Prize. So this is for organisations who are making a significant contribution towards the alleviation of human suffering, which obviously MAG's work absolutely personifies. And on this occasion, because it's their 30th anniversary year, the prize was increased ever so slightly to $3 million in unrestricted funding, which is obviously an enormous win for the organisation and an incredible prize contribution from Hilton.
What wonderful news. What an amazing difference it's going to make to the good that your organisation can do, making the world a safer place. And anyway, it's wonderful. There's things I'd like to learn about it, but there's a particular detail you mentioned the other day which I found fascinating. Can you share that particular twist to this story?
I can. And that particular twist is that we have been applying for the Hilton Prize for 19 years. So this was our 19th year of applying for the prize. So the conversation we started to have, Rob, was very much around persistence, tenacity, stubbornness, if you will, and kind of what that means when it comes to fundraising and this type of fundraising.
And it's such an interesting one. One of the most common questions I hear when I am doing training courses or if people meet me at conferences is, Rob, at what point do you think it's reasonable to give up and just sort of accept that, this is never going to work, or someone just doesn't want to fund you? And I've always found that an interesting question, because clearly sometimes the answer is there's a time to read the writing on the wall. This is not the right kind of partner or funder for you. But I have also learned very often, actually, initially not getting an answer doesn't mean this isn't destined to be a good partnership. I guess the other interesting thing is many people don't work for the same organisation for 19 years anyway, and I'm not saying they necessarily should. In this case, it so happens that you are so loyal to your charity and that you've stayed working there for all of this time, so you're in a position to know exactly every single year we've done this. But notwithstanding that, could you talk about the rationale why after the first year or two no money was flowing and yet it felt like the right thing to keep going?
Yeah, I think there's a few things around it really, and I think one of the key things around this particular opportunity is that the initial application is not hugely onerous. You're kind of looking for a nominator for your organisation. Some organisations will find that difficult and hard to do, and others will probably have a whole wealth of people they could perhaps talk to who would be willing to nominate the organisation. So, depending on who you are, you might find that easy or hard. And I think certainly initially, the prize have actually made that step quite easy. The eligibility points are very clear, and as long as you believe that your organisation fits with that eligibility, that first step is relatively straightforward and not that time consuming as a process. So I guess my logic for continuing with that was an absolute belief in MAG fits this criteria. We alleviate human suffering. We absolutely meet what they're asking for in terms of what we do, and certainly even over the years have done even more to meet that criteria, and kind of more people benefiting from the work that we do. And we also had access to lots of different people who were willing to kind of write that down for us and testify that the work that we'd been doing kind of meets that criteria. So I think certainly a big step, or a big first step, is assessing how time consuming something like this is year on year. And I think it's fair to say MAG have been a finalist more than once, but we've had lots of years when we've not even made the next stage, and that's crushing always. But it also helps to kind of highlight maybe what wasn't working with an application and what didn't get you through to that next step. So I think as long as you're always reviewing what that eligibility is and what the donor is actually asking for, whether it be a prize like this or whether it be a smaller foundation funder, then you can kind of weigh up the pros and cons of going for something.
There are presumably times when logically one shouldn't persist with a particular partner or funder. Could you talk us through your thought process generally, and for instance with this one?
Yeah, there are times when you say no more to an application process, and certainly there's been times where I can see that we fit the criteria, that our work fits, and it continues to be a no. So there's a few things there that I think I've learned over the years. One is the type of no that you're receiving. So a no, never darken our doors again, never return, is the no where you don't go back. You absolutely have to read the room and read what the donor is saying. But I think there are lots of variants of that in between, and some of it is using kind of your experience as a fundraiser and your own learning as a fundraiser and applications going in to gauge where to push and where not to push. And some of that is absolutely around your relationship management with a funder and how open they are to kind of building a relationship with you as a potential person receiving funding from them. And I think there is learning around, always questioning. I mean, Rod, this is something that you talk about a lot, kind of always questioning, always learning, always thinking about next steps and next moves. But I think year 15, year 16, of course, I'm sitting there thinking, is this ever going to happen for MAG? Am I absolutely crackers continuing to kind of go back and submit the application? And I think on this occasion, the questions I returned to were, do we fundamentally fit? And, this is a prize where an independent jury ultimately makes the decision. This is not the foundation. It's not the board of the foundation. We have no access to the people who make this decision. I think that's really critical because it's frustrating in some ways that you can't have an influence in a way that maybe you would with other funders. But you can position yourself to try and think from their perspective, what can I tell them that's new? What can I tell them that's interesting? And again, returning to your learning, Rob, and certainly learning I've heard you talk about before, donors are people. What is it that might inspire them about your work that maybe you've not thought of before and you haven't expressed previously? So I think continuing to question, are you losing your mind or are you doing the right thing? But also, what kind of no are you actually receiving from a funder, and making sure that you're listening to both of those things on balance before you maybe proceed to year 20.
Yeah, because I think all too easily we might misinterpret a no that isn't no never. It isn't no go away. It's just genuinely on this occasion, it didn't quite fit. Or for whatever reason, there was an even more pressing need, which the jury felt moved by this time. It's all well and good for you and I to be aware of this objectively, but after one of our listeners has applied to a thing for 2 or 3 years running and them still not be successful, it is quite hard for us to interpret the genuine meaning of the no. Do you have any tips to help us be objective about it rather than emotional about it?
I think there is that rereading what you've submitted and kind of really trying to put yourself in the position of global events, what else is happening around the world, what other organisations might be operating, who might be applying. We've got no sense of who that is in this case, but in others you might have a good sense of who else is putting themselves up. If it was a corporate partnership, for example, or you've attended a session where you know the other people in the room. So I think it is about trying to be as objective as you can, like you say, and actually rereading what you've written and thinking, am I really hitting the application eligibility? Am I really saying what I want to say to inspire this group of people? And, bless the Hilton Humanitarian Prize team and jury. They've read a lot about MAG. They probably know more about MAG than I do at this point. But I think, you've got to kind of think outside the box a little bit and think, did I put our most inspirational stories forward? Did I talk about the most important priorities for the organisation? And fundamentally, am I answering the question that they've asked? Which, in this application, any number of applications that I know obviously listeners are working on, that's always the case. Did you tick their boxes ultimately as a minimum, and did you inspire them? I think is the real critical element. And if you can't answer yes to that, then you can probably figure out why the no is a no and what kind of no it really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that said, Sarah, I wonder if you could give us a sense of improvements you were making along the way, either in terms of the content of the application and potentially the relationship with this funder.
Yeah, of course. And I think, whilst it is, as I've said, an independent jury who make the decision, there is an opportunity there, as there always is that opportunity to build relationships with the funder, and it's absolutely fundamental, and particularly with this, I believe, year 3, they didn't really know us and they probably were thinking, who are this organisation? Year 17, 18, chances of winning were increased because they knew a little bit more about us. And I think what I did post kind of 2020, when we were a finalist, but unfortunately we didn't win, and there was much sobbing and crying in rooms, was I really thought about what was happening in between application stages. So whilst you don't want to kind of bombard busy people with information, you're submitting an application and then, there's a period of time when you don't hear very much back, but quite a lot can happen in that time at an organisation, and it might be really fundamental to your application that you share that information. So I took steps around relationship building and being a bit more deliberate around sharing more stories with the people that I was in touch with at the foundation, with really simple things like wishing people happy Thanksgiving, you know, even though it's not something that we celebrate here, and trying to build that relationship with the team, mainly because they're the people who are reading and digesting so much about your organisation all the time. And in our case, in particular, they're hearing from us every year, and maybe not mountains have moved in that amount of time, but you want them to feel that kind of momentum and that progress towards their kind of alleviating human suffering target ultimately. So I think it's an opportunity, whereas, you know, writing an application and fitting it to X many pages and it being quite, you know, uniform, you have to do that and you're ticking the boxes. But what are those extras? What are those things where you saw this and thought of that person because you know that they're interested in the dogs or whatever it might be, that kind of ticks a box elsewhere personally and emotionally with a group of people? And you know, we've built this lovely friendship and relationship with the foundation who work on the applications, and they're an incredible group of people. But we've done that through sharing more and sharing tidbits outside of the application process to really help them to understand not just the organisation and the work that we do, but the type of people we are, and our passion and our commitment and our unwavering belief that we're deserved winners. And I think that that didn't impact us winning the prize, but help them to understand the organisation that we are a little bit better. And I think outside of this prize, that's something that I do in all of my relationships with any type of funder, whether they be major donors and individuals or whether they be other foundations who maybe feel a bit cold and a bit closed off. You know, find that person that you can have that connection with, pick up the phone if you can, you know, send those emails that kind of remind them that you've heard them and that you've listened to what they've shared with you, and do it regularly if you can. I think that is critical with this relationship, but critical of all relationship building where you can do it.
Yeah, I guess a key bit of it is doing that not only when you're asking or applying for something, but doing it because this is a relationship you care about. So it's an ongoing thing.
Absolutely.
Hey, this is Rob. And if you need to grow high-value fundraising income this year, our flagship courses, Major Gifts Mastery and Corporate Partnerships Mastery, will help you do exactly that. To give you a sense of the difference they can make, here's what Kuzla Raja, Director of Fundraising and Communications at Future Dharma, told us about how Major Gifts Mastery helped him.
We've easily made back the money that we paid for the course, and it's now integrated in everything we do. So we're still making much more money for us as a charity because of that investment, which now, by comparison to what we've raised, looks really small, actually. So yeah, do it. It's fantastic training, and it definitely pays off.
The next programs start late April 2026, and right now you can save with the early bird discount. So if you're interested, do get in touch today. All the info is on the training page at brightspotfundraising.co.uk. I really hope you can join us. This all makes sense, Sarah. One thing I just jotted down there was you mentioned dogs. Is it the case that animals are involved in the process of making these areas of land safer?
It is, yes. So not in all areas where we work, but in places like Cambodia, in Iraq, in Bosnia up until very recently, and in the Ukraine where we work as well, we are using animal detection, so dog detection systems to release land faster, essentially, if not clear it. So yes, we are using animals to do that.
And so how did you pick up on particular elements of what you do that were more interesting to the organisation?
It was a year that we didn't win, actually. We were lucky to have a visit from the foundation out to kind of familiarise themselves with our work a little bit more. And, you know, I appreciate that it's a little bit of a technical organisation, or it feels technical on the surface, certainly. And so they came out to Cambodia to visit with us, and in the process of many, many car rides, I learned that the person visiting with us had a dog and loved dogs and, you know, was exactly like me, just, you know, silly baby voices whenever dogs were in the vicinity. And we were lucky enough then to visit one of the dog teams out in Cambodia and to actually see them working and meet their handlers as well, which was this really phenomenal day of kind of learning lots about the organisation. But the dogs were definitely a highlight as part of that. And I think I just made a little mental note of, this animal experience, this dog experience had really been kind of quite key to the person that we were with. And so following that, and again, this kind of harks back to that, I saw this and thought of you type fundraising. I was just paid a lot of attention to kind of other stories that were coming out of the organisation. And one of the things that happened in that time frame was we deployed our first technical survey dogs out to the Ukraine programme to help release land there, in a very current context, in a context that is probably very much in your listeners' minds as well. I didn't need to provide that information. She didn't ask for that information, but I knew that it would be compelling that she was able to kind of meet this new set of dogs and then their handlers and kind of learn that we were taking what we'd learned in Cambodia and what she'd seen firsthand in Cambodia, and she could apply it to a different context, a very fresh context. And, she just loved, we talk about dogs a lot now, which is, just a bit sad. But I think that trigger of what is making someone light up, what is making someone more engaged with what you're seeing and what you're doing, just helps you to be a better fundraiser, helps you to build better relationships and ultimately have better, more impactful, deeper conversations with the people you're trying to tell about your organisation and bring with you on a bit of a journey, and not for it to be a one-off situation. And I would also say on the back of that, it's not possible for everyone, and it's often very difficult for MAG as well because we work internationally. But if there is ever an opportunity for your listeners to take a funder, to see the work firsthand and kind of witness what they can make happen, take it. Just, all the planning, all the pain in advance of that is 100% worth it if they can have the same experience as you have and take that belief away with them when they leave. So that would be my absolute top tip where it's possible.
Thank you, Sarah. I guess hindsight is a wonderful thing. And of course, hooray that it's all worked out. Clearly, as we look at it now, it was well worth plugging away. But goodness knows, even if our listener isn't planning to keep applying for something 19 years in a row, maybe they are just trying to G themselves up from disappointment of one Charity of the Year process to try again. And they know all too well just how painful it can be to put blood, sweat and tears and not get the result that you really feel your organisation deserves. It is really upsetting, isn't it? It's
devastating. And, I've been a fundraiser for 22 years. And, this is my lovely big win. But, there's been just as many crushing heartbreaks within that. And I think, it is important to note that particularly in 2024, we were a finalist for the Hilton Prize. We went out to Cambodia. We did this spectacular visit. We built this relationship. Everything felt very perfect about the application process. And we didn't win. And I just couldn't believe it. And I'm sure many of your listeners have been in that position where everything just felt so right. And yet it didn't go your way. So I completely understand what that feels like, not just around this particular application, but around many applications. And I think it's an interesting one. I was definitely given internally permission to not apply again if we felt like maybe we needed to skip a year or, regroup, think again, however you want to term that. Oh, I don't know whether it's just a personality trait or whether it's fundraisers in particular, but there's definitely something that made me think, no, we need to go for this again. We need to pick ourselves up. We need to dust ourselves off. I gave myself, a couple of days, didn't do it straight away. But I think it's really important when, and I'm sure many of your listeners feel the same, I believe in what we do. I fundamentally believe that we deserve this win. And so, yes, I took a couple of days to consider what our options might be in not applying, but it didn't take long for me to kind of be like, absolutely not. We're going back in there and we're trying again, and we're going to kind of put everything in that we didn't include this time. We're going to expand and we're going to include more of, and we're going to keep moving in that direction, and we're going to build off that fantastic visit we did in Cambodia, and we're going to make it even more spectacular. And, by doing that. And maybe from losing, so catastrophically at a time when we thought we'd done so well, maybe that helped to fuel the information we put forward the next time. And sometimes failure is fuel, and it does help you to kind of think more clearly about what it is you want to do and what you want to say. So I feel the pain of rejection and no's almost daily. But it is this, if you believe in what you're doing and you believe that it is right and it's the right next step, then pick yourselves up, dust yourselves off, crack on is my advice.
Hi, it's Rob. And just before we get to the last bit of the conversation, I wanted to ask, is there an area of fundraising that you need to improve this year? If there is, and if you find the bright spot ideas we share in this podcast helpful, please get in touch. Whether it's a bespoke training session for your team, or our Learning and Inspiration Club, the Bright Spot membership, or one of our 2 high-value mastery programs, we would love to help you smash your target this year. To find out more or request a chat, go to brightspotfundraising.co.uk. I totally see how it's okay to be really disappointed. Good fundraisers, I believe, are both able to use logic and able to be emotionally intelligent in how they use their emotions. And I get a strong sense of you using them as fuel. But still, I've got this lingering sense of, okay, maybe applied 2 years running, 3 years running, but to keep going so many times, to put it politely, I think that is a bit unusual. And I'm not saying all of our listeners need to apply for the same thing 19 years in a row, but I am suggesting they reconsider how easily they might move on to a different trust, company, major donor, or whatever it might be, or applying to a particular event to be the charity of the year. I do think there can be a tendency to move on quicker than we necessarily should. I'd really like to unpick, if I may, what makes you so pig-headed?
Honestly, my dad would thoroughly enjoy this conversation because he quite often talks about just how stubborn I am. And I am, that's absolutely part of my DNA. I come from a big family. We're all incredibly competitive as well as being stubborn, which absolutely probably forms part of this. I want to win for my organisation, and that absolutely plays a part in that. But I would say that you're right, it could be perceived as being a little bit crazy to kind of keep going for something for 19 years. But I think it is around reviewing the opportunity and then choosing when to move on. So I think, yes, maybe it is unusual to go for something for 19 years, but I genuinely believed in our ability to be a great laureate for the Hilton Prize, and that belief powered me through, probably with stubbornness and competitiveness at the heart of it. But I do think that that's fundraising. I think you need to believe that your organisation and your application is the strongest it can be, and you need to be happy to receive constructive criticism back and actually take that on board and think about how you could improve, and maybe not for the 3rd, 4th, 5th application to that organisation, but what can you take from that to other organisations and keep applying the same logic so that you just constantly improve. And I think that's really the only way to learn as a fundraiser and to keep getting better, is to dig deep, and keep going and keep looking for those opportunities. And I am not here saying apply 19 times. That's, it's not the purpose of this podcast, Rob, as we discussed in advance. It is just about intelligent stubbornness, I think is how you phrased it when we first chatted. So, it isn't always going to be the same, but it is just about when you don't think you should be walking away because you think you fit, don't. Believe in yourself, believe in the organisation you work for. And if you don't think it's time to move on and you don't think the no was a no, then try again, shift the boundaries, shift the story, and just give it another go until you feel comfortable.
Beautifully said, Sarah. So thank you ever so much for coming to share this story with our podcast listeners. A huge congratulations to everybody involved in winning this particular award. Best of luck to the organisation making the world a safer place, and I look forward to catching up with you very soon.
You too. Thanks so much, Rob. It's been amazing.
That's all, folks. Thank you as always for listening and for supporting the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast. If you liked it, please would you do me a favour and share it with your team or on LinkedIn, so together we can help as many people as possible. Good luck with your fundraising today. Good luck nurturing your own reserves of intelligent stubbornness, and I'll share another bright spot story with you really soon.